The metallic click of a revolver being checked echoed through the small boarding house room every night at precisely 10 o'clock. And Samuel Whitmore had learned to find comfort in that sound rather than fear. Rose Dalton had arrived in Roswell, New Mexico on a dusty Wednesday afternoon in June of 1881, carrying nothing but a worn leather satchel and eyes that held more stories than most people told in a lifetime. She had taken the room across the hall from Samuel at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, and from the very first night, he had heard that distinct sound of metal against metal, the careful placement of something heavy beneath a pillow, and then, finally, silence. Samuel was not the type of man to pry into other people's business. At 26 years old, he had learned that everyone in the West had their reasons for the things they did, and most of those reasons were painted in shades of survival rather than choice. He worked as a ranch hand at the Double Creek Ranch just outside of town, breaking horses and mending fences under the relentless New Mexico sun. The work was hard and honest, and it gave him enough money to afford his small room and 3 meals a day at the boarding house. Mrs. Henderson ran a respectable establishment, and she did not tolerate any funny business between her tenants, which suited Samuel just fine. He had no interest in complications, having come to Roswell to escape the memories of a war that had ended 16 years prior, but still lived in his dreams. Rose was different from the other women who stayed at the boarding house. She did not giggle or gossip over breakfast, and she did not lower her eyes when men spoke to her. She was 23 years old, with dark hair that she kept pinned up in a practical bun, and hands that moved with the kind of efficiency that spoke of hard work. She had found employment at the general store, keeping the books and managing inventory, and Mr. Patterson, who owned the place, had nothing but praise for her sharp mind and sharper tongue when it came to negotiating with suppliers. They had been living across the hall from each other for 2 weeks before they actually spoke beyond polite nods in the hallway. It was a Saturday evening, and Samuel had been coming back from the bathhouse, his hair still damp, and his shirt sticking to his skin in the summer heat. Rose had been standing outside her door, struggling with a stubborn lock that had a habit of sticking. "Let me help you with that," Samuel had said, moving closer. He could smell the faint scent of lavender soap on her skin, mixing with the ever-present dust that seemed to coat everything in Roswell. Rose had stepped back, her hand moving instinctively to her hip, where he noticed she kept a small pistol tucked into her skirt pocket. The movement was so natural, so practiced, that Samuel realized this was not a woman who startled easily or trusted quickly. "The key needs to be turned twice to the left first, then once to the right," he explained, keeping his hands visible and his voice gentle. "Mrs. Henderson keeps meaning to fix it, but she has not gotten around to it yet." Rose had studied him for a long moment, her green eyes taking in every detail of his face as if committing it to memory for some future reckoning. Then she nodded once and tried the lock again, following his instructions. The door opened with a satisfying click. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying the slightest hint of a southern accent, something soft and refined that seemed at odds with the hard edges she presented to the world. "You are welcome, Miss Dalton," Samuel replied, tipping his hat. "If you need anything else, I am just across the hall." She had not responded, simply disappeared into her room with a swiftness that suggested she preferred the company of her own thoughts to anyone else's. But that night, when Samuel heard the familiar sound of her checking her gun before bed, he found himself wondering what had happened to make a young woman like Rose Dalton sleep with a loaded weapon beneath her pillow. The summer days stretched long and hot across the New Mexico territory. Samuel fell into an easy rhythm with his work at the ranch, riding out before dawn and returning as the sun painted the desert sky in shades of orange and purple. He began to notice the small details of Rose's routine. She left for the general store at exactly 7 in the morning, her hair always perfectly pinned, her dress always clean and pressed despite the dust. She carried a basket that he suspected held more than just her lunch, and she walked with her head up and her shoulders back, daring anyone to bother her. The men in town had certainly noticed her. Samuel had heard the talk at the saloon, the way some of the ranch hands and drifters spoke about the pretty new girl at Patterson's store. But Rose had a way of shutting down unwanted attention with a single look, and after Jake Morrison had tried to get too friendly one afternoon and found himself staring down the barrel of Rose's pistol, word spread quickly that Miss Dalton was not the type of woman to be trifled with. Samuel found himself oddly proud of her for that, even though they had barely exchanged more than a dozen words. It was a Thursday evening in July when things began to change between them. Samuel had been carrying a heavy saddle up the stairs to his room, planning to repair a broken stirrup, when he heard raised voices coming from Rose's door. He paused, his instincts immediately on alert. "I told you I am not interested." Rose's voice was firm, but Samuel could hear the tension underneath it. "Come on now, darling, do not be like that," a male voice responded, slurred and insistent. Samuel recognized it as belonging to Carl Jennings, one of the men who worked at the livestock yards. "Just one drink. What is the harm in that?" "The harm is that I have said no 3 times now, and you are still standing in my doorway," Rose replied. "Move, or I will move you." Samuel set the saddle down and walked quickly to Rose's door. Carl was indeed blocking her entrance, one hand pressed against the doorframe, his body swaying slightly with drink. Rose stood inside her room, her hand once again at her hip where her pistol rested. "Carl," Samuel said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "Mrs. Henderson does not allow drinking in the boarding house, and she certainly does not allow harassment of her tenants. I suggest you leave now before she calls the sheriff." Carl turned, his bloodshot eyes taking a moment to focus on Samuel. "This is none of your business, Whitmore." "I am making it my business," Samuel replied, stepping closer. He was taller than Carl and broader in the shoulders from years of ranch work, and he used that to his advantage now. "You have 2 choices. You can leave on your own, or I can help you leave. Either way, you are going." For a moment, Samuel thought Carl might actually try to fight him, but then the other man seemed to deflate, muttering something under his breath about uppity women and men who did not know when to mind their own business. He stumbled away down the hall, nearly tripping on the stairs in his haste to leave. Samuel watched him go, then turned to find Rose standing in her doorway, her hand still on her pistol but her expression unreadable. "You did not have to do that," she said quietly. "I could have handled him." "I know you could have," Samuel replied honestly. "But Mrs. Henderson would have been upset about the blood on her nice clean floors, and I figured it was easier this way." Something flickered in Rose's eyes, something that might have been amusement or appreciation or both. "You think I would have shot him?" "I think you would have done whatever was necessary," Samuel said, "and I think Carl Jennings is not worth the trouble that would have caused you." Rose studied him again with that same intense focus she had used the first time they spoke. Then, slowly, she stepped back from her doorway. "Would you like to come in for a moment? I have coffee on the stove, and it seems I owe you some thanks." Samuel hesitated. He was very aware of Mrs. Henderson's rules about men and women visiting each other's rooms, but he was also aware that Rose Dalton did not offer invitations lightly. "I will leave the door open," he said, "so there is no impropriety." Rose nodded and moved to the small stove in the corner of her room. Her space was neat and sparse, with few personal belongings visible. There was a quilt on the bed that looked handmade, a small stack of books on the table, and a hairbrush on the dresser. Nothing that revealed much about who she was or where she had come from. She poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Samuel. He took it gratefully, realizing he had not had anything to drink since noon. "You do not ask questions," Rose said after a moment of silence. It was a statement, not a question. "Everyone has a past," Samuel replied, leaning against the doorframe. "And everyone has a right to keep it private if they choose." Rose wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, and for the first time since she had arrived in Roswell, Samuel saw some of the hardness in her expression soften. "I came from Georgia originally," she said slowly, as if testing the words. "A plantation outside of Savannah. My father was the owner and my mother was his wife. When the war ended, everything changed." Samuel waited, not pushing, just listening. "My father lost everything in the war. The land, the money, everything. He started drinking, and when he drank, he became violent. My mother tried to protect me, but she was not strong enough to stand against him. When I was 19, he tried to marry me off to a man 3 times my age who promised to pay off his debts. I refused, and he struck me so hard I could not hear properly out of my left ear for a week." She took a sip of her coffee, her hands steady despite the weight of what she was sharing. "That night, I took my mother's pearl earrings, the only things of value she had left, and I ran. I sold the earrings in Atlanta and used the money to go west. I kept moving, working where I could, never staying long enough for anyone to ask too many questions. And I learned very quickly that a woman alone needs more than just courage to survive. She needs to be willing to defend herself." "So you bought a gun," Samuel said softly. "I bought 3, Rose corrected. "I keep one under my pillow, one in my pocket, and one in my bag at the store. And I practice every Sunday morning before dawn so that if I ever need to use them, my hands will not shake." Samuel felt something shift in his chest, some understanding clicking into place. Rose Dalton was not just surviving. She was building a life on her own terms, refusing to let fear or circumstance dictate her choices. "For what it is worth," he said, meeting her eyes, "I think you are one of the bravest people I have ever met." Rose blinked, clearly surprised by his words. "You do not think it is strange, a woman sleeping with a loaded gun under her pillow every single night?" "I think it is practical," Samuel replied. "And I think anyone who judges you for doing what you need to do to feel safe has never had to fight for their own survival." Something in Rose's expression changed then, a wall coming down that Samuel had not even realized was there. She smiled, just a small quirk of her lips, but it transformed her entire face. "Thank you, Samuel," she said, using his first name for the first time. "Not just for tonight, but for understanding." "Thank you for trusting me enough to tell me," he replied. From that night forward, things were different between them. They began to share coffee in the mornings before work, sitting at the small table in the boarding house kitchen and talking about everything and nothing. Samuel learned that Rose loved to read, that she had a gift for numbers that made her invaluable at the general store, and that she had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh more than he had in years. Rose learned that Samuel had fought in the war as a young man, barely 16 years old, lying about his age to join up. She learned that he had lost his entire family to cholera the year after the war ended, that he had drifted west looking for a place where the memories did not follow him quite so closely. She learned that he was gentle with horses and patient with people, and that he had a way of seeing the best in everyone he met. They fell into an easy companionship that felt natural and right. Samuel found himself looking forward to coming home from the ranch, knowing Rose would be there, sitting on the front porch of the boarding house with a book in her lap. They would talk until the stars came out, sharing stories and dreams and occasionally comfortable silences. Mrs. Henderson noticed, of course. She was not the type of woman to miss anything happening under her roof. But she seemed to approve of the quiet courtship developing between her two tenants, often leaving extra portions of dessert at their places during dinner, and conveniently forgetting to enforce her usual strict rules about propriety. It was late August when Samuel finally worked up the courage to ask Rose if she would like to go for a ride with him on Sunday afternoon. They could pack a picnic, he suggested, and ride out to the creek where the cottonwood trees provided shade from the relentless sun. Rose had agreed with an eagerness that made Samuel's heart race. Sunday dawned clear and hot, as most days did in New Mexico. Samuel borrowed a gentle mare from the ranch for Rose to ride, and they set out just after noon with a basket packed by Mrs. Henderson herself, who had shooed them out the door with knowing looks and whispered reminders to be back before dark. The ride to the creek took about an hour, and Samuel used the time to point out landmarks and tell Rose about the area. She was a natural rider, sitting easy in the saddle despite claiming she had not been on a horse since leaving Georgia. They talked and laughed, and Samuel felt something warm and hopeful blooming in his chest. The cottonwood trees provided blessed relief from the sun, and the creek ran clear and cool over smooth stones. They tied the horses where they could drink and graze, then spread out a blanket in the shade. Mrs. Henderson had packed fried chicken, biscuits, fresh peaches, and a jar of lemonade that was still blessedly cool. They ate and talked, and Samuel thought he had never seen Rose look so relaxed. Her hair had come loose from its pins during the ride, and she had not bothered to fix it, letting it fall in waves around her shoulders. Her cheeks were flushed from the sun and the ride, and her eyes sparkled when she laughed at something Samuel said. "Can I ask you something?" Rose said after they had finished eating and were lying on the blanket, watching the leaves dance in the breeze above them. "Anything," Samuel replied. "Why have you never asked me to put away my gun? Everyone else thinks it is strange, dangerous even, but you have never said a word about it." Samuel thought about his answer carefully. "I think we all carry weapons of some kind," he said slowly. "Some are just more visible than others. You carry a gun because it makes you feel safe, because it reminds you that you have the power to protect yourself. I carry the memory of every battle I fought, every friend I lost. Those memories are my weapon against ever taking life for granted, against ever being cruel or careless with other people's pain. Your gun does not scare me, Rose. If anything, it makes me trust you more, because it means you are honest about what you need." Rose turned to look at him, propping herself up on one elbow. Her hair fell across her face, and Samuel reached out without thinking, gently tucking it behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and Rose leaned into the touch. "I am falling in love with you," she said softly, the words carrying the weight of confession and hope and fear all at once. "And that terrifies me more than anything else ever has." Samuel's breath caught in his throat. "Why does it terrify you?" "Because loving someone means giving them the power to hurt you," Rose replied. "And I swore when I left Georgia that I would never give anyone that power again." Samuel sat up, taking both of Rose's hands in his. "I cannot promise that I will never hurt you," he said honestly. "No one can promise that, but I can promise that I will try every single day to be worthy of your trust. I can promise that I will never try to change you or make you into something you are not. And I can promise that I am falling in love with you too, and that scares me just as much as it scares you, because I have not let myself care about anyone this much since I lost my family." Rose's eyes shimmered with tears, but she was smiling. What do we do now? We take it one day at a time, Samuel said. We keep being honest with each other, we keep showing up, and we see where this goes. Rose nodded, and then she leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft and sweet and full of promise, and Samuel felt something in his soul settle into place, as if he had been searching for this moment his entire life without knowing it. They stayed by the creek until the sun began to set, talking about the future with a cautious optimism that felt precious and new. Samuel told Rose about his dream of someday owning his own small ranch, just a few acres where he could raise horses and maybe some cattle. Rose told him about her hope of opening her own business someday, maybe a bookshop or a lending library, someplace where people could come to learn and dream. They rode back to the boarding house as the stars came out, and when they said goodnight outside Rose's door, Samuel kissed her again, longer this time with a tenderness that made Rose's breath hitch. "Good night, Samuel," she whispered against his lips. "Good night, Rose," he replied. That night, Samuel heard the familiar sound of Rose checking her gun before bed, and he smiled into his pillow, thinking about how much he loved every stubborn, brave, beautiful part of her. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness that Samuel had not thought possible. He and Rose were inseparable when they were not working, spending every free moment together. They went on rides every Sunday, explored the countryside around Roswell, and talked about everything under the sun. Samuel met Mr. Patterson and was pleased to see how much the older man respected Rose's work and intelligence. Rose came out to the Double Creek Ranch one Saturday and watched Samuel work with a particularly skittish horse, gentling it with patience and soft words until it ate grain from his hand. "You have a gift," Rose had told him afterward, and Samuel had felt proud in a way he had not since before the war. They had their first real argument in October. Samuel had mentioned casually that he worried about Rose walking home from the store after dark, now that the days were getting shorter. Rose had bristled immediately, her walls going back up. "I can take care of myself," she had said coldly. "I have been doing it for years." "I know you can," Samuel had replied, frustrated. "But that does not mean you have to do it alone anymore. I care about you, Rose. Is it so wrong to worry?" They had gone back and forth, voices rising, until finally Rose had thrown up her hands and stalked away. Samuel had let her go, knowing she needed space to cool down. She had come to his room later that night, knocking softly. When he opened the door, she looked tired and sad. "I am sorry," she said. "I am not used to someone caring about my safety without it coming with conditions or expectations, but I am learning. Please be patient with me." Samuel had pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I am sorry, too. I do not want to make you feel like I think you are helpless. I know you are anything but. I just love you, and sometimes love makes people worry." "You love me?" Rose had asked, pulling back to look at him. "I love you," Samuel confirmed. "I have loved you for a while now. I was just waiting for the right moment to say it." Rose had smiled through tears. "I love you too. So much it scares me sometimes." "Then we will be scared together," Samuel had said, and they had kissed away the hurt feelings and the fear, replacing them with something stronger and more enduring. By November, they were talking seriously about marriage. Samuel had saved almost every penny he had earned at the ranch, and combined with what Rose had managed to save from her work at the store, they had enough to think about buying a small piece of land. Mr. Patterson had offered to help, having grown fond of Rose and impressed by Samuel's character. "You are good for each other," the older man had told them one evening when they had stayed late at the store, going over accounts and making plans. "It is rare to see two people fit together so well." Samuel had asked Rose's father for permission to marry her, even though she had not spoken to him in over 4 years. He had written a careful letter, respectful but firm, explaining his intentions and his feelings for Rose. The response, when it came 6 weeks later, was bitter and brief. Rose's father refused to give his blessing, called her ungrateful and unwomanly, and said he wanted nothing more to do with her. Rose had read the letter without visible emotion, then folded it carefully and placed it in the stove, watching it burn to ash. "I do not need his permission," she had said quietly. "I stopped needing anything from him the night I left. Are you all right?" Samuel had asked, worried about the careful blankness in her expression. "I am all right," Rose had replied, turning to face him. "I have you. I have a life I built for myself, and I have a future I actually want. His approval or disapproval means nothing to me now. It is just words from a man I used to know." Samuel had held her that night, just held her, letting her work through whatever complicated emotions she was feeling. And when she finally relaxed against him, her breathing evening out into sleep, he had felt honored that she trusted him enough to be vulnerable. They were married on a cold December morning in 1881 in the small church at the edge of Roswell. Mrs. Henderson had insisted on hosting the wedding breakfast at the boarding house, and half the town had shown up to celebrate. Mr. Patterson had walked Rose down the aisle, his eyes suspiciously bright, and Samuel had thought his heart might burst from the sheer joy of seeing Rose in her simple white dress, smiling at him like he was her whole world. "I promise to love you exactly as you are," Samuel had said during their vows, speaking from the heart rather than the traditional words. "I promise to stand beside you, never in front of you or behind you. I promise to respect your strength and support you in your dreams. And I promise that you will never have to face anything alone again." Rose's voice had been steady when she replied. "I promise to trust you with my heart, even when it scares me. I promise to be honest with you, even when the truth is hard. I promise to build a life with you that honors both of us. And I promise to love you fiercely and completely for all of my days." They had sealed their promises with a kiss, and the small church had erupted in applause and cheers. They spent their wedding night in Rose's room at the boarding house, which would be their home for a few more weeks, until they could move into the small house that came with the 5 acres Samuel had finally purchased just outside of town. The land was not much, mostly scrub and desert, but there was a creek running through one corner and good grazing for horses. The house needed work, but it had good bones, and Samuel had already started making repairs on the weekends. "Are you happy?" Samuel asked Rose as they lay together, the moonlight streaming through the window. "I am happier than I ever thought possible," Rose replied, running her fingers through his hair. "There were so many times when I thought this kind of happiness was not meant for someone like me. That I was too damaged, too difficult, too independent to ever fit into someone else's life." "You do not fit into my life," Samuel said, kissing her forehead. "You are my life. There is a difference." That night, Samuel heard the familiar sound of metal against metal, the checking of a gun, the careful placement of it beneath the pillow on Rose's side of the bed. But now, instead of being a wall between them, it was just another part of who they were together. Samuel reached across the small space that separated them and took Rose's hand, lacing their fingers together. "I love you," he whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Rose whispered back. They moved into their small house in January of 1882 and spent the next few months working together to turn it into a home. Samuel continued working at the Double Creek Ranch, and Rose kept her position at the general store, both of them saving money and making plans. They bought 3 mares and a stallion, good stock that Samuel thought would produce fine foals to sell. Rose planted a vegetable garden and surprised them both by having a natural talent for it. By spring, they had fresh tomatoes, beans, and squash. Life settled into a rhythm that was comfortable and good. They worked hard during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, exhausted but content. They talked about everything, argued occasionally, made up quickly, and slowly built the kind of partnership that neither of them had thought possible. In April, Rose discovered she was pregnant. She had been feeling ill in the mornings, and Mrs. Henderson, who visited often, had taken one look at her and known immediately. "Oh, honey," the older woman had said with a knowing smile, "you have that glow about you. Have you told Samuel yet?" Rose had been terrified and thrilled in equal measure. She had never thought much about having children, had been too focused on survival and independence to imagine a future that included them. But now, carrying Samuel's child, she found herself dreaming of a little boy with his father's gentle nature or a little girl with her own stubborn independence. She told Samuel that evening after dinner, when they were sitting on the porch watching the sun set over their small piece of land. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice carrying both nervousness and joy. "I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." Samuel had gone very still, his eyes widening. "A baby, truly, truly," Rose confirmed. "Sometime in early December, the doctor thinks." Samuel had let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral, then swept Rose into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "We are going to be parents," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Rose, we are going to have a family." "Are you happy?" Rose asked, needing to hear him say it. "I am more than happy," Samuel replied, cupping her face in his hands. "I am blessed beyond measure. You have given me everything, Rose. A home, a purpose, love, and now a child. How could I be anything but grateful?" The pregnancy was not easy. Rose was sick almost constantly for the first few months, and the heat of the New Mexico summer made everything worse. But Samuel was endlessly patient, bringing her cool water, rubbing her aching back, and reading to her in the evenings when she was too tired to do anything but lie in bed. Mr. Patterson had been understanding about Rose needing to reduce her hours at the store, and Samuel had picked up extra work at the ranch to make up for the lost income. They managed, though money was tight, and both of them were exhausted most of the time, but they were happy. Even in the difficult moments, even when Rose was crying from pain or frustration, and Samuel was worried sick about her, they were happy because they had each other. Their son was born on a frigid night in early December 1882, 3 days before Christmas. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Samuel feared he might lose Rose, might lose them both. But Rose was as stubborn in childbirth as she was in everything else, and she fought through the pain with a determination that left the doctor shaking his head in admiration. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and screaming, Samuel had wept openly. The doctor placed the tiny, perfect boy in Rose's arms, and she had looked down at him with an expression of such pure love that Samuel's heart had felt too big for his chest. "What should we name him?" Rose asked, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. Samuel thought for a moment, then smiled. "What about James? After my father," Rose nodded. "James Whitmore, it is perfect." James was a good baby, relatively calm and happy as long as he was fed and held. Rose recovered slowly from the birth, and Samuel took care of both of them with the same gentle patience he showed to the horses he trained. He walked the floor with James in the middle of the night when the baby was fussy, sang him soft songs, and changed diapers without complaint. "You are a natural at this," Rose told him one morning, watching him coo at James while changing his clothes. "I want to be the kind of father I remember," Samuel replied. "My father was a good man, patient and kind. I want James to grow up knowing he is loved and valued no matter what." "He will," Rose assured him. "We both will make sure of it." That first Christmas as a family of 3 was quiet and perfect. They could not afford many presents, but Samuel had carved a small wooden horse for James to have when he was older, and Rose had made matching quilts for all 3 of them. They spent the day at home, just the 3 of them, marveling at the tiny life they had created and the future that stretched out before them. The years that followed were full of hard work and small joys. Samuel's skill with horses became well known throughout the territory, and people began bringing him animals to train, paying good money for his expertise. Rose returned to work part-time at the general store once James was old enough, bringing him with her and keeping him in a cradle behind the counter. Mr. Patterson doted on the baby, often entertaining him while Rose worked. They bought more land, acre by acre, and more horses. Samuel built a proper barn and corral, and Rose expanded her garden. They saved money carefully, planning for the future and for more children. James grew into a bright, curious toddler who loved the horses as much as his father did. In the spring of 1885, Rose gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Clara. The birth was easier this time, and Clara was a placid, happy baby who rarely cried and slept through the night almost from the beginning. James, now 2.5, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything. Life was good, better than either Samuel or Rose had dared to dream. They had built something real and lasting, a home and a family and a partnership that grew stronger with each passing year. They still had their disagreements, their difficult days, their moments of frustration and fear. But they faced everything together, with honesty and love and the kind of trust that only comes from really knowing someone. Rose still kept a loaded gun under her pillow every single night. It had become such a part of their routine that Samuel barely noticed it anymore, except on the nights when he would watch her check it and feel a surge of love for this complicated, beautiful, fiercely independent woman who had chosen to build a life with him. On their 5th wedding anniversary in December of 1886, Samuel gave Rose a gift he had been working on for months. It was a small book, hand-bound in leather, and inside were pages of his careful handwriting. "What is this?" Rose asked, running her fingers over the smooth cover. "Open it," Samuel said, suddenly nervous. Rose opened the book and began to read. It was their story, written from Samuel's perspective, starting from the first night he had heard her checking her gun and ending with their life as it was now. He had written about falling in love with her, about the ways she had changed him and helped him heal from the wounds of his past. He had written about the birth of their children, about the home they had built together, about the dreams they still had for the future. "I wanted you to know," Samuel said softly as Rose read, tears streaming down her face, "that I see you, all of you, the strong parts and the scared parts, the brave parts and the vulnerable parts, and I love every single piece. You do not have to be perfect or easy or anything other than exactly who you are. You are enough, Rose. You have always been enough." Rose set the book down carefully and moved into Samuel's arms, holding him tight. "How did I get so lucky?" she whispered. "We got lucky," Samuel corrected. "Both of us. We found each other when we both needed finding, and we had the courage to take a chance on love even though we were both terrified." They stood there in the kitchen of their home, holding each other as their children slept peacefully in the next room, and the New Mexico wind whistled softly outside. And Rose thought about how far she had come from that scared 19-year-old girl who had run away in the night, how much she had changed and grown and learned to trust. She still kept a loaded gun under her pillow every single night, That had not changed and probably never would. It was too much a part of who she was, a symbol of her independence and her refusal to ever be helpless again. But now when she checked that gun each night, she did it knowing that she had someone who understood, someone who loved her not despite her scars but because they were proof of her strength. Samuel had never asked her to put the gun away, had never made her feel strange or broken for needing it. And in not asking, in simply accepting that part of her, he had given her something more precious than safety. He had given her the freedom to be herself completely, without apology or explanation. That was love, Rose realized. Not the grand gestures or the passionate declarations, though those had their place. Real love was the quiet acceptance, the daily choice to show up, the willingness to see someone fully and love them anyway. Real love was Samuel never asking about the gun, and Rose learning to trust him with the reasons why she needed it. By 1888, their horse ranch had become one of the most successful in the territory. Samuel's reputation had spread far beyond Roswell, and people came from as far away as Texas and Arizona to buy his horses. Rose had finally opened her bookshop in town, a small space next to the general store where she sold books, stationery, and newspapers. It was not a big business, but it was hers, built with her own money and her own vision, and she was proud of it. James was now 5 years old and already showing signs of his father's gift with animals. Clara at 3 was as sweet-natured as ever, with a love of books that delighted her mother. They were talking about having another child, though Rose wanted to wait another year or so. Life was busy and full, and she wanted to make sure they could give proper attention to each of their children. Then, in September of that year, a telegram arrived that changed everything. Rose's mother had died suddenly, and her father, in his grief and failing health, had requested that Rose come home to Georgia to settle the estate. Rose had stared at the telegram for a long time, feeling nothing at first, then everything all at once. Her mother was dead. The woman who had tried to protect her, who had been too weak to truly stand up to her husband but who had loved Rose in her own limited way, was gone. And her father, the man who had driven her away, who had struck her and tried to sell her like property, wanted her to come back. "I do not know what to do," she told Samuel that night after the children were in bed. "Part of me thinks I should go, should face him one last time and try to find some kind of closure. But another part of me never wants to see him again, never wants to set foot in that place that holds so many bad memories." Samuel listened, holding her hand. "What does your heart tell you?" "My heart tells me that my life is here now," Rose replied. "That you and the children are my family, and that man in Georgia stopped being my father the night I ran away. But my head tells me that if I do not go, I might always wonder. I might always feel like there is unfinished business." "Then we will go together," Samuel said firmly. "All of us. I will not let you face him alone, and the children should meet their grandfather, even if just once. Then you can make whatever decision you need to make about the estate, and we will come home to our life here." Rose felt relief wash over her. She had not realized how much she needed to hear that she would not have to do this alone. They made arrangements for the ranch and the bookshop, leaving trusted friends in charge. Then in early October, they boarded a train heading east, beginning the long journey back to Georgia. The trip took over a week, and by the time they arrived in Savannah, all of them were exhausted from travel. Rose had not sent word ahead that she was bringing her family, so when they arrived at the plantation house where she had grown up, her father was not expecting them. The house looked smaller than Rose remembered, more worn down and sad. The fields were overgrown, the paint was peeling, and everything had an air of neglect and decay. This was not the grand plantation of her childhood. This was the skeleton of something that had died long ago but refused to fall. Her father answered the door himself, and Rose barely recognized him. He had aged terribly in the 7 years since she had last seen him, his face gaunt and lined, his hands shaking slightly. He stared at her for a long moment, then at Samuel and the children, his expression unreadable. "Rose," he said finally, his voice rough. "You came." "I came," Rose confirmed, keeping her voice neutral. "This is my husband, Samuel, and these are my children, James and Clara." Her father's eyes moved over them, taking in Samuel's strong, capable presence and the 2 well-dressed, healthy children. Something flickered in his expression, something that might have been regret or shame or both. "Come in," he said, stepping back. "We have much to discuss." The next few days were difficult in ways Rose had not anticipated. Her father was dying, that much was clear. The doctor said he had perhaps 6 months left, maybe less, and in facing his own mortality, he seemed to have found some measure of clarity about his life and his choices. "I was not a good father to you," he told Rose one afternoon when they were alone in his study. Samuel had taken the children into town to give Rose and her father time to talk. "I was cruel and selfish, and I let my pride and my anger destroy the one good thing I had left after your mother. I do not expect you to forgive me. I do not even know if I deserve to ask, but I want you to know that I am sorry, truly sorry." Rose listened, feeling that familiar, careful blankness settle over her. She had imagined this moment so many times over the years, had rehearsed what she might say if given the chance. But now that it was happening, she found she had no interest in recriminations or revenge. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said finally. "Not for you, but for me. Carrying around anger and resentment was too heavy, and it was keeping me from being happy. So I let it go. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting, and it does not mean I want a relationship with you now. Too much has happened. Too much time has passed." Her father nodded, tears running down his weathered face. "You have a good life, a good family, I can see that." "I do," Rose agreed. "And I built it myself without any help from you or anyone else. I am proud of that." "You should be," her father said. "You are stronger than I ever was. Stronger than I ever gave you credit for." They talked more over the next few days, not healing years of hurt, but at least finding some kind of peace. Rose learned that her mother had left her personal jewelry and some money in a separate account that her father had never touched. It was not a fortune, but it was substantial enough to make a real difference. "She wanted you to have it," her father explained. "She made me promise years ago that if anything happened to her, I would make sure you got what was rightfully yours. I kept that promise at least." Rose accepted the inheritance with mixed emotions. This money represented everything her mother had never been able to give her in life, the protection and support she had needed but never received. But it also represented a final gift, a final acknowledgement that her mother had loved her in her own limited way. They left Georgia 2 weeks after arriving, and Rose did not look back as the train pulled away from the station. She had made her peace with the past, had taken what was hers by right, and now she was going home to her real life. "Are you all right?" Samuel asked as they settled into their seats, the children already nodding off from the excitement of travel. "I am," Rose said, and she meant it. "I finally feel free of that place, of those memories. I can close that chapter of my life completely now and focus on the future." The money from her mother's estate allowed them to expand the ranch significantly. They bought another 30 acres, built a proper house with indoor plumbing and electricity, hired help for the ranch and the bookshop, and even took a trip to San Francisco, something neither of them had ever imagined doing. Rose also used some of the money to start a small fund for women in situations similar to what she had faced, women who needed help escaping bad circumstances or starting over in new places. She worked quietly, not wanting publicity or praise, just wanting to help others the way she wished someone had helped her. The years continued to pass, full and rich and good. They had one more child, another daughter born in 1891, whom they named Sarah after Samuel's mother. Their children grew healthy and strong, all of them inheriting their parents' best qualities. James became a gifted horseman like his father. Clara developed a love of learning and books like her mother. And Sarah had a fierce independence and stubborn streak that made both her parents laugh with recognition. Samuel and Rose grew older together, their love deepening and maturing with time. They celebrated 20 years of marriage in 1901, surrounded by their grown children and the life they had built. Samuel was now 46, his hair silvering at the temples, but his body still strong from years of physical work. Rose was 43, still beautiful, still fierce, still keeping a loaded gun under her pillow every single night. They sat together on the porch of their home one evening, watching the sun set over their land. The children were all inside, James and his new wife preparing dinner, Clara reading to her younger sister. Life was exactly what they had dreamed it might be all those years ago when they were just two broken people trying to figure out how to love each other. You ever regret it? Rose asked suddenly. Choosing this life, choosing me. Samuel turned to look at her, genuine confusion on his face. Regret? Rose, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Loving you, building this life with you, it has been the greatest privilege of my existence. Why would you even ask that? Because I have never been easy, Rose said. I know that. I am stubborn and independent and set in my ways, and I still cannot sleep without a gun under my pillow, even after all these years of being safe and loved. Samuel reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together the way he had done thousands of times before. You have never been easy, he agreed with a small smile. But you have always been worth it. Every moment, every challenge, every stubborn argument. And as for the gun, I told you 20 years ago that it does not bother me, and that is still true today. It is part of who you are, and I love who you are. Rose felt tears prick her eyes. I love you, Samuel Whitmore, more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person. I love you too, Rose Dalton Whitmore, Samuel replied. Always have, always will. They sat together as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful and lasting. Rose thought about the scared young woman she had been when she first arrived in Roswell, sleeping with a loaded gun and trusting no one. She thought about the long journey that had brought her here, the risks she had taken, the walls she had torn down, the love she had learned to accept. And she thought about the man beside her, the cowboy who had never asked her to put away her gun, who had seen her completely and loved her anyway, who had given her the safety and partnership she had always needed but never thought she would find. That night, as they lay in bed in the home they had built together, Rose checked her gun one last time before sliding it under her pillow. Samuel watched her from his side of the bed, and when she turned to him, he pulled her close. Good night, my love, he whispered, kissing her forehead. Good night, Rose whispered back, settling into his arms with the easy trust of decades of love. Outside, the New Mexico wind sang through the cottonwood trees. And inside, two hearts beat in comfortable rhythm, in love and at peace, exactly where they were meant to be. They had found their happily ever after, not because life had been perfect or easy, but because they had chosen each other, every single day, through all the challenges and joys that came their way. Their story was one of survival and strength, of finding love when they least expected it, of building a life on their own terms. And through it all, Rose had kept her loaded gun under her pillow, and Samuel had never asked her to put it away, because true love meant accepting someone completely, without conditions or expectations. That acceptance, that understanding, had been the foundation of everything they built together. Years later, when their grandchildren would ask about how they fell in love, Samuel and Rose would smile at each other across a table full of family, and Samuel would say, "Your grandmother taught me that strength comes in many forms, and love means never asking someone to be anything other than who they are." And Rose would add, "And your grandfather taught me that being independent does not mean being alone, and that the bravest thing you can do is let someone love you exactly as you are." Their legacy was more than just the successful ranch and the bookshop and the land they had acquired. Their legacy was the example they set for their children and grandchildren about what real partnership looked like, about how to build a life based on mutual respect and unwavering love. The gun under the pillow remained, a symbol of Rose's past and her strength, a reminder of the journey she had taken from that frightened girl fleeing Georgia to the confident woman who had built an empire with her bare hands and her fierce heart. And Samuel never minded, because he understood that some scars never fully fade, and some protections never stop being necessary. And so they lived out their days together, in love and in partnership, in the Wild West they had both helped tame, two souls who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk together into the light. Their love story became legend in Roswell, the cowboy and the woman with the loaded gun, proof that sometimes the most unlikely love stories are the ones that last forever.